In this lesson, we will finish our composite and review what we have learned. In our previous lessons, we've made it up to this point where we have our CG renders composited. We've made holdouts. We've added a rain particle system and integrated it with deep. And we've added fog to replace our bad atmospheric volumetric render from RenderMan. I'll show you what this looks like now. We have our background, and then we have all of our CG deep holdouts. And over here on the right, we have our rain and our fog holdouts. And this is where we left off last time with this node tree. I've organized this a bit since. So as we come down here, all the different holdouts are being merged together. They're labeled. They're merged with an over. It's important to mention that I'm merging all, so under also merge all. And if you remember, a great way to keep track of what you're doing is to use labels. So not only am I labeling what the element is called upstream that we're merging, but I'm also adding in the little expression, value, and then the knob, in this case also merge, which of course allows us to see beyond RGBA what's being merged, which is very helpful. And this script follows the theory of B-spline compositing, which is something that I haven't discussed yet, but now is a great time. So in B-spline compositing, it's something that you may be familiar with. Basically, the theory is that in Nuke, when you disable a node, it disables the A input, and the B input becomes a pass-through. And you tend to work from back to front. So the root of this composite is actually the background. So if I disable this merge and the others separately, then you'll just see the background. If I enable it, now the CG from the A pipe's flowing through. So to make this a little bit more articulate, I'll step through it like this. So we have on this just the character. Then we're going to merge the ground. Large vegetation 1, large vegetation 2, vegetation small, and trees. So as you can see, if you just toggle the disabled, everything else still works. If you were to connect these in the other way, let me swap the inputs here. It would still look the same, but if you disabled it, it would follow the B pipe, which means that only the small vegetation would become visible. You can see it's highlighted yellow because it's where the data is flowing through. So only this element would now be visible. So this is really efficient because as you go through your composite, you can just toggle things on and off, toggle different layers, and very intuitively manage what's being rendered. So once we put together the Grollo CG, it goes into this template here. Now, some of you might be familiar with CG multipath compositing. Basically what's happening here is the CG was rendered in a rendering engine called Redshift, which is a fairly new GPU-accelerated biased renderer. And what this template does is it takes the standard AOVs that are output from that render, and it allows you to rebuild the beauty pass. The whole purpose of this is just having the flexibility to be able to change colors or more likely change the amount of specular reflections, refractions. So I won't go into technical detail about how this is particular to Redshift. It's fairly similar in theory to other rendering engines like RenderMan, but every rendering engine is different. So for your situation, this might not necessarily apply. Something to point out is that here, check for missing passes. Basically what's happening is all of these passes are being combined. They should reconstruct the beauty, and they're being subtracted from the incoming beauty pass. So if all of the passes don't exist, they won't all be subtracted, which means something will be left behind in this operation, and then you'll be able to see which AOV was not included in the template and which needs to be. And then finally, the alpha channel gets copied back in because the AOVs, we don't use these alpha channels when we merge these together. These are just RGB. And then I strip out everything except RGBA, the object IDs, and the normal, the position, and the depth, because those are things that could be useful downstream. And I actually do use them in a few cases. So what I decided to do was, because we've added rain and atmospherics, I thought we should make this look a little bit more cloudy, overcast, gloomy, like a rainy day. So the first thing I did was just decide to try to get there through grading. It's pretty fast. So this grade, I basically just pulled some of the green out, made it more blue, made it a little bit less contrasty. Because if it's an overcast day, you don't have direct sunlight, so there's a little bit less contrast. Added a vignette, just a simple roto shape. This really brought out the composition to really focus your attention at the center and make things a little bit darker around the edges. Really help things look a little bit more like they're in shadow. At the end here, I'm adding some grain to help it look more photographic. I'll get to the focus at the end because it's PG bokeh and it's very slow to render. So something that I wasn't too happy with is I wasn't too happy with the way that these plants looked. So I went ahead and I used the object IDs that we made before to isolate them, and I graded them down, made them a little bit darker and a little bit more blue. So these are just some grades. They did the same kind of grading that's being done overall, but just specifically to these plants, and I masked them with the object IDs that we're using. So you can see here, this is just the ground, vegetation. I just thought this made everything just sit in a lot better. And then I thought that the highlights on Grollo's eyes were just a little bit too hot and a little bit too white. So what I did is I used the luminance for the eye reflections to sort of isolate this highlight here. And then I went ahead and graded this one down. So we just look here. Pretty subtle difference, but I think it helps. And in this case, what I did was I used the position pass to make a position mat. And if you've never used position mats before, it just uses the values of the position pass to generate a new mat. So this is really cool. If you've never used these before, I recommend looking into the technique. It's a bit more, pretty subtle as well, just to bring down these highlights. They were very bright, way over 1. Now they're a little bit more subdued. So now it's starting to look pretty good. And the last thing I did was grab PG bokeh and I rendered out a deep pre-comp. Took everything, every volume, made a single pre-comp of it, and then just fed it back in at the bottom here. And the aperture value I decided to use was f11 for the camera. I thought that was a nice photographic value. So this is where we end up. This is our final composite. We've reached the end of the course. I hope you enjoyed it. Good luck with all of your deep adventures and happy compositing!